Annenberg Media.
By the National Science Foundation, America's investment in the future. By the American Society for Microbiology. And by the Office of Biological and Environmental Research of the United States Department of Energy. Additional funding was provided by the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations. This program has been made possible in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
What if your life, all life, depended for its very existence on creatures that outnumber us millions of times over, yet few of us have ever seen? It does. And what if one day plant, animal, and human life on Earth began to disappear, and we didn't know why? Because we didn't understand these creatures' power to control the environment. It could happen, but perhaps it won't, if we learn to understand that we are not the true masters of life on Earth. Microbes are. I'm Jim Leinfelder. In this episode of Unseen Life on Earth, we'll explore the long evolving relationship between microorganisms and multicellular organisms and the various natures of those relationships. For the most part, we and other multicellular organisms enjoy a mutually beneficial relationship with microorganisms. For example, the bacteria residing in my large intestine help me break down food and make important vitamins. And it's largely the same case with the cows here. Without microbes in their digestive tracts, ruminant herbivores, such as cows, wouldn't have the capacity to break down cellulose and convert it to the meat and dairy products you and I rely on them for. Now, I suppose cows could have evolved the capacity to produce the catalysts you need to break down cellulose. The fact is they didn't. Instead, they evolved into a relationship with microbes that can break down cellulose and turn it into usable organic acids. At Michigan State University, there are studies focusing on the mutually beneficial relationships between microbes and multicellular organisms. Dr. John Bresnak is a microbiology professor participating in these studies. Hi, Dr. Bresnak.
Hi, Jim.
I think I'll pass on the handshake here. I can't help but notice I want to talk to you a little bit about the relationship between microbes and old Bessie here, and I'm struck by this appliance on the side of her. What's going on here?
Well, Jim, this is called a fistula, and it is a surgically implanted porthole, in effect, that allows one to observe and sample rumen contents. Would you like to maybe get some rumen fluid?
Oh, I'd love to, but I think maybe I'll join you in putting on a lab coat here. It looks a little messy. Now, what is the point of accessing it this way when, if we're patient, it'll come to us from this end?
Well, the ruminant animal feeds on plant material, and as you know, plant material is rich in cellulose.
Right.
But the ruminant doesn't have its own enzymes, cellulases, to degrade cellulose and other plant polysaccharides. So it carries out what's called a pre-gastric fermentation, in other words, before the stomach fermentation, and that occurs in the large rumen, which is about 100 liters in capacity.
Wow.
So the ruminant animal, as you can see, is feeding on some forage here, and it chews it to small bits, which then pass down into the rumen of the animal. And then a diversity of microorganisms, a dense community of microbes, carries out the digestion or the breakdown of plant polymers like cellulose and converts them to volatile fatty acids, organic acids, which the animal can then take up from the rumen into the bloodstream and which serves as the energy source for the animal. So would you like to maybe grab some rumen fluid and then take it back to the laboratory and get an idea of what kind of microbes are in there?
I'd be honored.
What you can do is stick your arm into the rumen, and you'll see it's pretty warm, and grab a bunch of rumen contents, and then what we can do is squeeze the rumen fluid into a little Erlenmeyer flask.
Wow. What amazes me is that this doesn't seem to bother Bessie in the least. Interesting. In a sense, if we take the long view here, ruminants, cows and other herbivores who have a rumen, more or less evolved in concert with the microbes, and the microbes evolved in concert with the ruminants.
Exactly. There are certain species of microorganisms that are found virtually only in the rumen and have adapted to that habitat and are highly competitive there, and function very efficiently with the other microbes that are present.
Well, what do you say we go back to the lab and get a look at these critters?
Let's do it.
Okay.
I'll see, Jim, in the relatively short amount of time it took us to come back to the laboratory, the fermentation in the rumen fluid has continued, and the gas production, including methane and CO2, has caused a lot of the fibrous particles to float up to the top. So the fermentation has continued while we were bringing it back.
Within the rumen itself, is there an interrelationship between those microbes, the way there's an interrelationship between the cow and the microbes?
Right. Usually in anoxic habitats where an anaerobic community is carrying out the fermentation, there's not one single microbe that does the whole job by itself. It requires a community of organisms, different physiological types, each coordinating with another to carry out the entire fermentation. There's not one organism that can do it all. For example, the products of the fermentation by one group of microbes actually serves as the substrate or food for another group of microbes, which in turn give off products that yet other organisms in the food web can use. And the overall concerted interaction of these different groups is what actually helps to carry out an efficient fermentation of the plant material. So they can be thought of like working in an orchestra where each member of the community has its own particular function.
And they're, in a sense, as vital as any of the cow's organs are to the process of digestion.
Absolutely, because without them, the cow would be starving. It's the degradation of this plant material to smaller carbon compounds that actually serves up the energy source that the ruminant animal uses.
This unique interaction with microbes isn't limited to ruminants. A similar process occurs in a much smaller host, where microbes turn wood into food. To you and me, this is a quaint and rustic old barn. But to a colony of termites, this is a delectable supply of food. But while termites are able to eat wood, alone they could no more make a meal of it than you or I could. In order to digest the wood and extract from it the nutrients they need to live, termites have had to evolve into a mutually beneficial relationship with microbes. Dr. Bresnak also studies the relationship that termites enjoy with communities of microbes they host in their digestive tract. Of course, the natural question is, this is the microbiology department, so, why aren't these over in the entomology department? Why are you keeping termites?
All right. Well, I get asked that question a lot, and the reason is that we are studying the microorganisms in the digestive tract of termites to understand how they interact with each other, and also how they enhance the ability of the insect to digest wood, which is very difficult to digest in the first place.
Can we get a look at these guys?
Sure. First, although most people generally think of them as pests, as destructive pests, in fact, termites are one of our most abundant terrestrial insects, and they feed on one of Earth's most abundant plant materials, namely wood. So termites, through their activities, and in turn through the activity of their gut microbes, help to degrade this material, not only to provide energy and food for the termite, but also to recycle this carbon back to the atmosphere as CO2 for photosynthetic activity so that the carbon cycle of nature can continue.
Again, it's really the microbes.
It's really the microbes, that's right.
These examples with the cows and the termites are both illustrations of relationships known as mutualism, a sort of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours understanding between organisms. This is the rule rather than the exception in all ecosystems, from the smallest inside a termite to the vast ecosystem of the rainforest of Costa Rica. Although these relationships have existed for eons, the extent and significance of mutualism is a fairly new revelation for many biologists. Mutualistic relationships have been known for a long time, but the enormity of the microbial influence on other parts of the world's ecology and maintenance of all life is a new scientific frontier. Every creature in the forest environment is making something, using something, transforming something. A single tree may be home to 100 species, insects, birds, plants, vines, and thousands of species of microbes. There are 5,000 species in a teaspoon of soil. Virtually all the recycling in the forest is done by microbes. Many of these microbes need and use oxygen, just as we do. And they release carbon in the form of carbon dioxide, just as we exhale. The slime mold spreading across this tree is a collection of microbes, individually microscopic, collectively visible. Fungus, responsible for much of the forest recycling, is also formed from billions of fungal cells living together. In one way or another, microbes connect every living thing in this forest, every part of what biologists call the web of life. Ignacio Chapela is a pioneer in his field of mycology. A microbiologist from the University of California at Berkeley, Chapela's professional interests overlap with those of colleague Dan Jansen.
As you walk through the forest with Dan, he is looking at it mostly from the point of view of larger organisms, insects. I'm looking at it from the point of view of microbes. And it is fantastic, very enjoyable to see how those very different views really match and complement each other.
Ignacio Chapela's specialty is fungi. Fungus, perhaps surprisingly, is a form of microbe.
Fungi are very different to other microorganisms. We know that they are much closer to animals than they are, for example, to plants and certainly to bacteria, yet they are microorganisms. Many people don't realize that mushrooms are fungi and that fungi are microorganisms, therefore mushrooms are microorganisms.
Fungal cells are microscopic, but when they grow together, they become visible strands. When it's time for them to reproduce, strands such as these go through a remarkable transformation.
Fungi are the supreme decomposers. They can penetrate into pieces of wood, even leaves, and break down the carbon accumulated in these materials. All life on Earth is based upon carbon. Fungi break it down and respire back into the atmosphere carbon dioxide, making it available in such a way that, again, other organisms can take it back. So in that sense, microbes in general, and particularly fungi in terrestrial ecosystems, are the supreme recyclers.
Fungi break down complex compounds and transform them into nutrients for living plants.
The fungus helps the plant capture nutrients that the plant would not be able to capture without the fungus. And the fungus gets in return sugars, and other nutrients that it also needs to survive. Fungi play also very important roles that are just as important as the decomposition. They form a vast network, that is an organized network, through the soil and up plant bodies and all over the landscape that establishes real communication networks. This communication can happen through nutrient processing, nutrient shuttling from one place to the other. There are plants that establish intimate relationships with that network and are able to send nutrients from a larger plant to a smaller one that might be suffering under the canopy and help her out, help that other plant out. And in many other ways, fungi, microbes, form a network that connects the whole forest.
The fungal network increases the speed and efficiency of recycling, aiding the lush growth of the whole forest. Lurking in the foliage is a major player in the forest drama. 50 million years ago, a particular species of insect forged a unique partnership with a certain type of fungus. The leafcutter ants collect leaf fragments by the million and store them in their nest. In the nest, a fungus decomposes the leaves. The ants eat the fungus.
The fungus provides the ants with the sole source of food. The young and the adults eat solely this fungus, which they feed the leaves to. Can you see the leaves freshly brought in here? All this material is fungus that is being grown on these leaves. These ants, of course, then would never be able to survive without this fungus. The ants provide the leaves to the fungus, and the fungus gives back some food to the ants. So it's a happy contract agreement that they have, just based on nutrition. "50 million years ago, the ancestors of these ants invented a system so efficient that it took over 30% of all the recycling of all the forest foliage." All of a sudden you have an ant and a fungus that join forces and start doing a totally new job in the ecosystem. Life takes a totally new face and a new form and starts working differently.
Ignacio Chapella and Dan Jansen combine their expertise in two fields of biology. Together, they are gaining new knowledge of how microbes and larger forms of life are connected, and new insights into the complex workings of the web of life. Today, all across the world, all plants depend on the microbial world to feed them nutrients. In turn, terrestrial plants supply 50% of the oxygen we breathe. Marine microbes like cyanobacteria and phytoplankton produce the rest. Through all of nature, microbes govern the cycling and reuse of nutrients. We have learned that microbes are part of all living processes, from the activities of single cells to a myriad of relationships between microbes and plants and animals. The sophistication of these relationships has developed throughout evolution. We are now learning to use these complex interrelationships to address some of the problems created by human activities. The great age of machines has multiplied our powers, but a price has been paid. The federal government's 310 square mile Savannah River site in South Carolina is one of the most polluted tracts of land in the United States. People can't live here. microbes can. They routinely adapt to contaminants that would sicken or kill us. Methanotrophs, bacteria found in soil nearly everywhere, survive by eating natural gas, or methane. What if we could expand their diet? Terry Hazen is a specialist in bioremediation, the use of multiple bacterial species, including methanotrophs, to clean up contamination.
How can we take those microbes and really utilize their extreme abilities to biodegrade material and direct it towards specific pollutants that are found in the water and the soil and even in garbage?
Microbes survive by taking in nutrients and degrading them, or breaking them down, with powerful chemicals they manufacture called enzymes. At the Savannah River site, radioactive materials for America's nuclear weapons were made for 40 years. This polluted the landscape. Microbes and their enzymes may have the power to clean it up.
When the Savannah River site was first built back in the early 50s, they started a process here where they used a lot of solvents. They stored that in those tanks, and then periodically they would release it through a pipe system underground, which was quite leaky. And so a lot of the contaminants leaked out into the ground along this linear path, and then it seeped down through the soil and got into the groundwater. Now that's where it's the problem, because once that material gets into the groundwater, then potentially it contaminates drinking water wells. These chlorinated solvents have been linked to leukemia in children and things like this.
Chlorinated solvents like trichloroethylene and dichloroethylene are among the most widespread and cleanup-resistant contaminants. Hazen tried something new. He harnessed the unique powers of methanotrophs by feeding them extra methane gas.
The bugs are great because they're everywhere, these methanotrophs in particular, and by adding the natural gas, they grow up to higher densities, higher concentrations, so they degrade the contaminants. Same enzyme that they use to degrade the methane and use the methane as a food will also degrade this contaminant. In fact, it'll degrade 250 other compounds.
The microbes turn the poisonous solvent into carbon dioxide and salt. Hazen inserted long pipes underground, beneath the contamination and its natural population of methanotrophs. He pumped in air laced with carefully regulated amounts of methane gas. The better fed methanotrophs population increased 10 billion times. In less than 2 years, their enzymes eliminated nearly all the contamination.
Well, what happens once we're done? Well, we just stop pumping in the methane, bacteria die back to their natural levels, and everything's back the way it was.
As we learn more about microbial appetites and how to stimulate them, we may turn microbes into our greatest allies in the war against pollution. There are millions of exchanges of nutrients and energy between hundreds of thousands of species. Every organism gets what it needs and gives what it doesn't. And in the ecosystem as a whole, the exchanges balance.
But these relationships aren't all good. Though a microbe's only interest is to grow and reproduce, sometimes that can conflict with our own interest to do the same.
In the next 2 episodes, we'll explore both the normal and potentially harmful relationships between microbes and man, and what happens when these relationships fall out of balance.
Annenberg Media.
By the National Science Foundation, America's investment in the future. By the American Society for Microbiology. And by the Office of Biological and Environmental Research of the United States Department of Energy. Additional funding was provided by the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations. This program has been made possible in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
For information about this and other Annenberg Media programs, call 1-800-LEARNER and visit us at www.learner.org.